Hello again, everyone. This is Bob Pulver. In this episode, I catch up with my fellow IBM alum, Stela Lupushor, who's now an author, a startup co-founder, and a people analytics community leader in New York City. Stela and I discuss how organizations can navigate AI-driven transformations with a human-centric approach. We emphasize the importance of redefining work and the value exchange between organizations and individuals, highlighting AI's role in moving people to higher value activities and enhancing decision-making in HR. As you'll hear in each episode, I ask all my esteemed guests what they recommend to elevate one's AIQ, so check out Stela's insight. Hope you enjoy my discussion with Stela, and thank you again for listening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I'm your host, Bob Pulver. With me today is my old friend and colleague, Stela Lupushor. Stela, thank you so much for joining me.
Bob, thrilled to be here and thrilled to be on something that we can finally do together. It's been a long, long time since our IBM passed, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. So just for introductions, if you could just give the audience a little bit of detail about your background, before IBM, after IBM, at IBM.
It's
set the stage.
Before and after, right? The path to IBM was non-conventional, right? I do come from a math and computer science background, but I spent most of my career in consulting, in management consulting at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I came to IBM through the acquisition of PwC Consulting. And then I spent a good chunk of my time while at IBM on the management consulting side. And then I moved to internal HR. And a lot of the work that I've done was at the intersection of process improvement, service delivery transformation, ERP implementation, and custom system development. And towards the latter part of my career, already in the internal IBM role, I did play consulting or consultant type role, but this time was the client was the Big Blue. So I did some HRIT strategy, business development work, analytics strategy, or in social analytics. That's, I think, where our paths cross, and then some HR strategy work. After IBM, I took the analytics path. I run people analytics at a couple of financial institutions, and then since 2016, 2017, I pursued the independent portfolio career. So I do consult, and a lot of my work is that intersection of analytics, technology, and human-centric design. I teach a class on the same at NYU, so developing the next generation of HR leaders to think differently about the role of HR and how they approach the work. I advise startups and VC funds. And to me, that's a way to not only learn and stay abreast of all the technology innovation that is happening in the market, but also shape and influence their approach to their product development. And what else? I run a meetup group locally here in New York area of people analytics practitioners, and wrote a couple of books and love to stay on top of the latest developments that are impacting work. The world of work, which pretty much is everything, right? All the noise around generative AI, I'm sure we'll get to that shortly. But to me, that's kind of a fascinating emerging space that will probably disrupt in a big way what HR does and how it does it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about, it's amazing that our paths didn't cross earlier at IBM. I mean, I know you came in with PwC, but it just seems like the process transformation, supply chain transformation, which tied to some of the ERP stuff. And it just seems like we probably passed each other in hallways without realizing that we had some, overlapping, projects and things like that. But I feel like a lot of those different experiences, gave us in some ways relatively unique perspectives on, process, technology, data, to be able to see each of those focus areas through different lenses, with different leadership teams and things like that, I think really helped to shape a broad perspective of a lot of different areas, and then allowed us to maybe go deeper selectively into some of these other areas. And I've also noticed that some of these concepts that we worked on 10, 15 years ago are just as relevant now as ever.
A lot of interesting work was just the nature of IBM itself. I feel that a lot of the problems we were trying to solve, a lot of the conversations and research and experimentations we were privy to, a lot of the industry's been catching on to it. I feel like every time somebody brings up some innovation, it's like, oh, we've been talking about this 10 years ago at IBM, right? So while we were in the middle of a lot of that work, it always felt, I personally felt impatient. And I felt like, well, we are not doing fast enough because the world is moving so much faster. But then I probably have to speak for both of us. We were way ahead of our time. And to some degree, we still are, and how we see the world and how we think about the technology and where it's going to go. We build that second sense or the intuition to see around some of the corners, obviously not all of them, but I think we kind of fine tune our intuition to really anticipate where it's going to go and try to prepare for it. So hopefully between the two of us we'll be able to unpack some of these emerging disruptions that talk about fast development and talk about being ahead of their times. I think we're kind of in the middle of a lot of the major transformation. If you think about some of the foundational technologies and how they've been developing, we are in the midst of one of it emerging in a way that we may not even comprehend the full complexity of changes to what work is and how it's getting done, what organizations do and how they go to market, what's the operating model they're going to have. And back to your point about consulting skills, this is it, right? We have been prepared to be fast at learning and with hope that we'll be able to keep up with it. Whether or not that's going to be the case, we'll see. But to me, one of the things of the current stage we're at in this development is the pace at which it changes. And I think it's a fascinating time to be really in the midst of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this isn't to, pat IBM on the back for all the things that they've done, but just, you know, with some of the subject matter and some of the focus areas that, whether it was in the product teams or it was in IBM research or maybe even some of the um, innovation that came out of consulting engagements, it just seemed like we had a lot of toys, right? And there was a certain element of trust that we had. Most of the systems were, they were, you could argue, in perpetual beta, but we used them as if they were production ready. I mean, it was still within the four walls of the company, so to speak. But things like, social network analysis, understanding how knowledge is flowing across an organization, peer-to-peer learning, like work, with the advent of social media and some of these social collaboration tools, being able to work out loud, as some would say, work through collaboratively some of the problems that you'd just be stuck on if you weren't otherwise engaged and picking your head up and looking around and seeing what other people were working on. So it just seems like these concepts are as important as ever. In fact, when I think about some of the metrics that people are citing in some of these surveys related to AI, they keep talking about like individual productivity, and we are not even scratching the surface when it comes to the value, what some of these AI tools, including generative AI.
Hi, I'm George LaRock, and I'm looking forward to exploring the critical trends shaping the future of work and technology with you over on the Work Tech podcast. Now, this podcast is a little different. I bring together industry leaders, innovators, and investors, and we go deep into market intelligence that matters to HR pros and tech providers alike. So give the Work Tech podcast a listen here on the Work Defined Podcast Network, and please subscribe if you like it. See you there.
Can provide. So individual productivity is just sort of phase one, if that, in terms of where value and opportunity can be generated. So when we think about like organizational transformation, and how AI is sort of permeating different roles, levels, I mean, there's really no escaping it. I mean, if it's not in your organization now, it soon will be, or maybe it's not officially there, but it's happening in a shadow IT kind of sense, where people are using it. how do you think about the readiness of organizations to actually absorb and successfully navigate this? Because I feel like, well, as you know, I mean, transformation programs often fail more often than not, in fact, or at least don't have the impact that the companies had hoped for. So if this AI driven transformation is bigger and more impactful and more disruptive than any prior transformation, how are organizations, preparing?
I will go through a few of my hypotheses, and this is mostly based on the conversations I have with HR practitioners, less so with, um, you know, practitioners in IT or in other business function. So take that as an HR biased point of view. I don't think HR is ready. And I think the mindset is, well, we'll approach it like any other transformation. This is top down. We'll create the program. We'll appoint people to lead. We'll create champions. We'll create training programs, and off we go to the races. And with new generations of models coming seemingly every 6 months, or some big news and announcements that are completely killing half of the startups with wrappers on top of LLMs overnight, I don't think that approach is going to work. But there are a couple of issues with that approach. One, this is a bottoms up transformation. A lot of people are using it, have been quietly using it. And I think the companies that feel that they do have the possibility of control over the deployment may be misleading themselves in that confidence, right? People are already using it, and you really need to catch up on one side with some of the guidelines and guardrails and say, these are the things you can with our internal data or on our internal devices. What you do on your own devices, of course, that you're yours to figure it out. But here are the rules for the companies, and you cannot do what type of data you cannot allow, what type of information you cannot disclose, because it's here are the basic of what these models do and how they operate in order for you to make the right type of choice and decision in the moment. When it comes to deployment, I've seen a couple of scenarios. One is where the company says, no, 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 we will figure it out, and then maybe you'll be allowed to experiment, but only when we deploy an internal version of this tool for your experimentation purposes. Another scenario where companies say, yep, we will give you the space and go experiment, go figure out how you can do it. And once you do, then you as an HR can help the rest of the organization migrate to a future where everybody else can take advantage of it, which I think is probably the best approach. One, because it's very difficult to figure out the possibilities just by reading articles or listening to podcasts. This is one of those technologies where you have to do it. You have to play and experiment with it. The other interesting kind of difference I see is this approach from the business side to consider this as a cost saving opportunity. It's like, well, yet is another technology, we'll automate, we'll get rid of 30% of the workforce and off to the races to meet the next shareholder goal, or whatever it is that the bottom line goal that they are going after. And yet again, this is a very different transformation. It's a technology that allows you to be productive, but it's not the way you used to think of outsourcing, right? Yes, you outsource some of the work to a very smart partner and buddy, but you have to be highly skilled and highly intelligent in your subject expertise to be effectively using it without exposing the company to a variety of risks or hallucinations or all the other potential issues with an emerging technology. So again, it's not about cost savings. It's about ability to empower your top talent to do more, better, faster, or help those who are earlier in their career may not have the expertise to begin to learn about the internal knowledge base, assuming you're training some of this or fine-tuning some of these models with the internal knowledge base. So it's very counterintuitive and very different approach to deploying this type of technologies. And I think the same old template for transformation is not going to work. What do you think?
No, I agree. Well, I agree. I mean, I think this probably echoes your point about that this isn't just about outsourcing and delegating to someone else and then just sort of wash your hands of the responsibility. If you think of AI as an intern or however whatever sort of model you want to think about it, you've still got to apply your critical thinking skills to how much do I trust it to feed it information? How much do I trust the output of what I've given it and what it's telling you, either to recommend a course of action or to generate a piece of content or to help you know, provide or generate insight that you might not have otherwise found on your own because of either bandwidth or whatever. It's just sometimes culled through so much information that no even team of people could have possibly generated and coalesced that insight in such a efficient manner. But it doesn't mean, I mean, it's not a calculator, right? And it's not, and you can't just trust it implicitly and know that it's 100% accurate. And so I don't think everyone has to know everything about the technology and how it works. I mean, you learn to drive a car before you get your license, but no one asked you to become a mechanic. So there's only so much that you need to know. I mean, yeah, you need to know the basics if your car breaks down. I mean, maybe there's some basics that you should know, but you need to know, some of the things that would prevent you from being sort of the weak link in the supply chain of the data that flows through these systems, because it all does go back to the data that was used to train these systems, and that's why we don't necessarily know with some of these systems what data did go in, and therefore right away we should not trust it. We should treat it like our sort of know-it-all friend that seems to have all the answers and be confident in their answers, yet they actually don't know. They shouldn't have such confidence in their own answers. So I do think it's more complex than other transformations, but I also think there's a tremendous opportunity to spend some time, whether it's on your personal device, like you said. Like, you don't have to do some of the experimentation that you can do can be off hours, and just spend some time playing around. And if you are getting efficiencies from it on the automation side, well, how are you going to reinvest some of your time if you just saved yourself an hour a day? What are you going to do with that hour, right? So take some responsibility. As we've always been told, your learning and your career development is ultimately in your own.
The use case podcast is where technology vendors get to talk about themselves. And it's a wonderful place for vendors, investors, and practitioners to listen to the story of the solution, the features, the benefits, the attributes, etc. And we get to know the CEO or founder during the call, and we also get to know the tech. So subscribe to the Use Case Podcast.
Hey there, I'm Tim Boris, host of the Working Well podcast, where business strategy meets human sustainability. If you're an executive, a leader, or change maker ready to ditch burnout, build thriving teams, and drive real results, this is your next must listen. Tune in on the Redefining network or at timboris.com/podcast.
Hands, well, then put it in your own hands. And, I admitted that I have to do a better job of that myself, right? And there is a lot to absorb. And that's why I want people to just focus on the things that are helping them in their role, in their workflows and their processes, and helping them achieve the metrics that they're being tracked. I mean, that's a whole subject. That's a whole discussion topic in itself. Do we have the right metrics to even help people along this journey?
I think you're making such a good point, because especially for knowledge work, a lot of our definition of value gets translated into quantifiable things, right? Utilization, how many hours you've worked, how many hours you've charged, how many lines of codes generated. And it's really difficult to define what productivity is in knowledge work. And it's even more difficult to quantify it, right? So with a lot of the activity that constitutes productive work and knowledge work being now automatable through these technologies, how do we quantify what value is, and what do we pay for, what do we charge for? this is a bigger systemic issue that we'll have to figure out as we embrace and integrate a lot of this into our workflow more and more. What is work, right? And how we define this value exchange between the enterprise and individual. At the core, if I work half of the time by delivering the same amount of time, does it mean I take vacation for the rest of the week? I don't think the company is going to agree to that. But at the same time, there is a skew now in how much work I do and how much value I deliver. So I think it's, again, we're very early on that journey of transitioning to a future where we may need to redefine a lot of constructs that currently define work and the work environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I wonder, how deeply you went into this, because I know when your book Humans at Work that you wrote with Professor Davis at NYU, one of the themes around this transformation is well, what I call responsible AI. I mean, I use that umbrella term because that seems to be what the marketing teams have pushed out into my conscious. But I know, like, in academia and in research communities, we think more about the concept of human-centricity, and so I just wanted to explore a little bit about some of the themes, how this correlates to some of the themes in your book, which, if I'm not mistaken, predates anything related to generative AI. It was more just about organizational, change and humans in those kinds of initiatives and things like that.
And the book came in 2022. Thank you, pandemic, for giving the space and time to to write it. And I think we were going through yet another transformation of how people work and how they relate to work and how organizations operate. And for us, it gives a lot of principles that always were part of our mindset and how we consult and how we think about the opportunities at work. And I think those are perennial. I don't think you can take and replace examples from pandemic time with now the technological disruptions, and the principles are still holding true. We even have in the book a manifesto, right? How do you create organizations that are human-centric? And a lot of it is very basic principles, right? We all want to be respected. We want to have access to stable, financial, secure work environment. We want to flourish, whatever your definition of flourishing is. We want to do the work. We as humans want to perform and do our best, but if our context and the work environment where we operate is not designed with us from the get-go, or a lot of the technological widget and devices and everything we use are designed by engineers for engineers, right? We'll end up with everything else that falls on the HR side, right? We have people with mental health and stress issues. We have people who are disengaging. We have people who are not upskilled to perform. And it is a natural reaction to our work context. And I define the context in broader sense, not just, technology, right? It starts from the vision and the purpose of the organization. What is it that we are here to do and what problems we are here to solve? Am I, as a human being, aligned to that mission? Do I see role models? Do I see leaders that I want to emulate and are inspiring for me to do my best work? Do I have the right guidance and direction and expectations? Am I clear on the measurements? Are my rewards structures and systems motivating, or are they punishing more than anything else? Am I proud to work and tell my friends that I work here? Are the tooling friendly and enabling me to do my best work, or do they get in the way of my performance and frustrate me and create more stress? Right? There are basic things that I react to, and at the end of the day, I'm just a human being that I will do whatever I'm punished or rewarded for, right? It's very simple. So how that context where I work is supporting my desire to do my best work. And if it's not, it will show up in my performance, in my engagement level, in my annoyance with my colleagues, in my relationships with my manager, and my, everything. So use generative AI is the same. Am I being penalized for using it when it actually helps me be much faster, better? And yes, I will be able to do more work, because I'm already doing more with less. How do we think about integrating this new enablement and do it in a way that is really supporting the human flourishing at work? And thinking about it through a very different lens. We typically think about technology as something for the organizational endeavors, in whatever pursuit that is. But in this case, I think it's a lot more for humans. How can humans do everything they do better, faster, so they can focus on what matters, which are truly human things? Some of the activities and jobs that we do shouldn't exist in the first place, right? They're repetitive, they are mind-numbing, they're boring us, they're frustrating us. So why can't we delegate that to technology to do it so we can do what really brings us joy or brings us satisfaction?
Yeah, absolutely. I think moving people to higher value activities is where you shift from.
What I love about the Workforce Agility Limited Series by Cornerstone was we talked to executives and customers all about skills. Skills, 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 skills. Cornerstone has a wonderful background in learning and development, training, etc. Their LMS is world class, but they've centered the business now, not just on that, like building upon that, but building upon how everything is moved to the skills economy. So check out the limited series called Workforce Agility, and you can get it wherever you get your podcast. And it's just a wonderful series where we talk to their executives on the shift of why, and also their customers that are using it. So check it out whenever you get a chance. Appreciate it.
Like the automation kinds of use cases, which you could argue even only the most mature automation use cases are really, I would classify as AI, but you know how the market likes to adopt the shiny object. So everything is falling under AI now. But I do think about, moving beyond, productivity, certainly way beyond individual productivity. We work in teams, we work across, processes and workflows and things like that. And so, but as people do free up some of their time, and let's assume that, that does get appropriately, at least some portion of that cost savings or cost avoidance and that efficiency is sort of reinvested in either more technology to find other use cases to deploy that technology, or it's reinvested in learning and development and upskilling or reskilling or whatever is needed. Um, I think about some of your focus areas in HR around like talent intelligence and people analytics and things like that. And while roles in those domains, like any other, have some level of administrivia that needs to be managed, I think about those roles as um, decision making and decision support roles, which I think is where we're really going to see a lot more value. So how are you seeing AI sort of coming in as another sort of layer of insight and intelligence?
There's How much time do we have?
It's sort of a loaded question, but no, I just feel like some of it. I mean, you know this better than me. It's not like AI, or at least some types of AI. Predictive analytics and predictive attrition, and there's all kinds of algorithms and uses of advanced analytics and prediction, and so I just wonder. Obviously, this takes things up a whole nother level, but I guess I'm just wondering, like, this was already pretty advanced for most people to get their heads around. So I'm just trying to see, like, what's the incremental gain, at least as based on some of what you've seen with AI coming in.
I would venture to guess it's a very different ball game and opportunity and pivot for analytics. If you think about the skills and knowledge these practitioners have, right? They understand the data, they understand how to build infrastructure and backend integrations to the systems inside the company, how to normalize, how to clean up, how to render a lot of the content, and all for what? For the purposes of creating a dashboard that nobody is going to look at for the most part. Let's face it, let's be honest, right? So this pursuit of either predicting attrition or generating a dashboard for a very small, narrow set of users, it's limited in its value. And hence we have such a low adoption. And the problem was people analytics still being somewhat of a special group that, needs unique skills and gets burned out really quickly just because of the banging your head against the wall all the time and talking about the same issues and never getting to the end of the road. I think with a lot of this generative AI, there are several opportunities. One, making our life easier, right? If you have the ability to convert unstructured data and really use language to query it in a very easy way to transform, and there's a lot of way to make it even not only for us and our productivity improvement and take advantage of it, but also help our end users to use normal human language to interact with the data. It still doesn't minimize the need for what analytics and data science and data engineering has to do all that integration and create a data set that can be queried and make sure certain questions are addressable or not, making sure the access control is managed adequately and any risk for data exposure and is minimized. That's one part. And this is just purely for analytics practitioners to be able to deliver on what they do better, faster, and more user-friendly. The bigger opportunity, I think, for us is to really be part of an organizational adoption. Just because we happen to be in HR and specialize, there's a lot of HR and people data that has to be integrated into the workflow. And we already know how to do that. We already know and have access and know how and who can access what from people data perspective, right? So now is really about bringing that knowledge into the work environment. How managers are going to be able to make decisions. Now they can query that data in the same way HR has now the ability to do that. We can integrate other work system, not just HR, IT systems, right? We can look at across other processes where people contribute and have a way to do it. So for us, it is the opportunity to step into these new spaces and be part of a broader transformation across the company, not just focusing on HR and people data for HR purposes. I don't know if you see it the same way.
Well, sometimes I empathize with people analytics folks just because they're some of the smartest people I've met. Leadership always says, well, if you have a business case, right? If you have a good idea, if you have a business case, bring it to us and, we'll evaluate it, whatever. So I just think, well, let me get this straight. Some of the smartest people in your organization who should have the ear of the senior leadership, they're bringing as much data as you could possibly bring, and yet they're still underfunded, can't get investment that they need, they can't grow, they can't establish a stronger partnership with the lines of business or whatever. It's just like, what else can I do? I mean, I don't know. It's frustrating.
I would also question the type of questions we typically go after, right? For the most part, a lot of conversations go into attrition, into some of the HR specific measurements. Less so, we really truly focus on business questions. And I think that's where the gap is, because we are perceived as still HR solving HR problems.
So by that, you mean like you're still more reactive?
Some of it is reactive, but we're not helping the business at the core solve business problems, right? We're not talking about revenue generation. We're not talking about customer satisfaction. There's less likely to see examples that are people talking about where you are just connecting employee data to business data. It's more about HR systems data and more HR process related outcomes that we focus on. And, of course, business are going to say, look, you're solving some of HR problems. It's not a business at the core of it, at least not in the way you formulate it, not the way you position it. So let me give an example, right? We talk about, well, let's predict who's going to leave, right? The perennial prediction of attrition. Can managers do something about it? I think by the time we identify somebody or we already have somebody leaving, it's too late. As opposed to saying, well, first let's look at the signals that we see along the employee life cycle, where the first interventions that we can put in place to prevent that attrition. And then why does it matter? Can we quantify the business in business language why attrition is a bad thing, right? Naturally, managers know, right? It takes a long time to replace somebody. It takes so much productivity that I lose by not having somebody in the role. It takes customers that get annoyed because they don't get their product or whatever this person was delivering it. So if you put it in a business language and then you say, and here's how much money direct cost, because you have replacement cost, you have talent acquisition cost, you have all sorts of marketing and everything else that goes into that. Here's how much indirect costs that occurred. Here's how much revenue loss that happens by the time somebody who gets replaced in 6 months, and then by the time they get productive, it's there is a cost to that. And by the way, if you only spend 5% of that amount to pay this person to retain them because they've indicated in the latest engagement survey that compensation is one of the biggest problems or reason for their potential attrition, you're going to save all of this, right? You're now talking in a very different terms. And I don't think we're, at least not most of the analytics teams that are really connecting some of these dots for the leaders, and they're still trying to sell to HR and the HR leaders. And that's where, there is a gap in mindset and misalignment in terms of the expectations and goals certain leaders have, right? At the end of the day, HR is not held accountable for attrition directly, right? It's manager who does. So you need to think about which measurements need to be presented to which personas and stakeholders to make it meaningful to them.
When I reflect back on some of the capabilities that IBM had worked on, because I spent most of the latter half of my tenure there working, connecting clients to research in these like innovation labs. And I just remember obviously, seeing, Watson come out of the labs. I had the Jeopardy studio in my mock Jeopardy studio in my office, and then moving into the Yorktown research headquarters facility. I saw some of the like next generation Watson, like where they were going with some of the cognitive environments and stuff like that. Like, could you have this essentially this cognitive advisor through voice commands just interacting and being part of like an advisory meeting or a board meeting or whatever, and you just ask these natural language questions. And I thought it was so fascinating, not just like the intelligence gathering capability and the assimilation and the summarization of that, and showing like the results visually on like literally a dynamic sort of graph. I guess it was yet another sort of tease to me when I left, and all my toys were taken away, because here we are, 8 years later, and we're still just hypothesizing about what some of this could do. And part of this is asking the right questions, but part of it as well is, and I'm not trying to take our jobs away, but when I put on my like systems thinking hat about some of these things, it's like, what is the point of doing any long range, even Horizon 2, Horizon 3 kind of planning, if you're not going to incorporate all of these different factors and data points and trajectories of technological change and whatever. If you're not going to try to put it all together and do some real like scenario planning and real like putting the strategic in strategic workforce planning, then what are you doing? Like, it's just, when it comes to talent, you're just pushing the revolving door.
Can you define workforce for me? What's your definition of workforce?
Workforce to me is anyone that contributes towards a common goal, regardless of their contractual affiliation with the entity, like the organization, right? So that's full-time, part-time, contract, contingent, gig, freelance, fractional. It could be anybody. It could be and then obviously global, diverse, anybody at all that's contributing to your goals.
And I'm sure many people who are listening to this probably thinking, well, they're still ahead of their time, right? What about digital labor? Chatbots, right? Workforce is really the entities, the units, individuals, whatever collection of that takes place that gets the work done. And that can be individuals, that can be digital entities, that can be teams, that can be your clients who you're engaging in co-creation, right? They're doing the work on the behalf of the company. And I think the problem we have is defining what work is and looking at the lens of activities through job descriptions. And rarely a job description describes what needs to get done. It's mostly a recipe for either a unicorn, or it's a lot of stuff that it's been there for the past 20, 30 years that the next manager just sprinkles in new technology language. And in a way, does a disservice to us because it's being used to filter people out as opposed to filter people in. We use it as a minimum required. And if I already have all the skills necessary for the job, that means I will be bored in 3 days as soon as I start doing that. I think we need to rethink what is the work that needs to get done, the problems we're trying to solve for, and then what is the most optimal mix of talent and workers and workforce to get it done. And back to your definition, right? It's a lot broader than just one or two type of worker types or contractual relationships we have. Furthermore, once we understand what the work and the worker match is, then what is the most optimal work environment, workplace for them to do that work? You are running a podcast. That's the work you're doing, and you're doing it online on a riverside environment. Some other people need to have in-person activities because they're interacting with machinery. But maybe even with machinery, you can have a virtualization, some immersive goggles that transmit, from an expert somewhere else remotely located, the information that you need to do, even though you may not have the skills, and you can do the repair of that equipment. Right? There are a lot of different ways to do the work, especially as more and more technology becomes available that allow us to do it differently, whatever the definition of differently is. And the last concept that we're not integrating typically is the worth, right? That value exchange. What is it that you come to work for? What motivates you? And what is the fair exchange between what I want versus what the organization is willing to give and pay? And how might we optimize it such that we maximize the value that both the organization gets and me as an individual? So if you think about these 4 components, work, workforce, workplace, and worth, the inability for the organization to deliver on its strategy is the inability to match and optimize these 4 elements. Because if we don't define the work, then we may not know exactly the type of work that can get that work done. Or if we don't provide the right type of work environment, they'll not be able to do it well. Or if we don't motivate and don't exchange the value well, it's not going to get done. So all that strategic planning and thinking that you have is not going to end up being delivered on just because you didn't do the adequate matching across all these 4 elements.
No, I love the way you frame that. When I think about strategic workforce planning and I get a little out over my skis when I talk about this because I'm not my domain expertise, but it just seems like understanding the trajectory of technological change, because today some of the advancements in AI are happening so fast that you've got to understand what skills. So it's like every time you've got a new task or a new project or whatever, there's a decision that can ultimately be made. Do I add this to the plate of someone who just saved them 2 hours a week, so now they have the bandwidth to do it? Is this task or project going to expand in the short term, and therefore I need to find a net new sort of resource? And then is that net new resource something that's coming soon with advancements in AI that I'm ready to actually implement and adopt and, fund? Or is it something I need soon and I might need more of it, but not in the long term, and therefore I don't want to hire full time? Then where's my best sort of, either fractional or part time or contingent, force or whatever? And so you're right. I mean, I think all of those pieces are factors in your formula, and that formula is ever evolving, right? That's part of concept of a dynamic workforce ecosystem, is being able to make those decisions and maintain some level of agility as the business needs change and as the market dynamics change.
Other thing at play, and again, this is probably heavily influenced by my time at IBM when we were working on this future of work strategy back in 2010, 2011, 2012. And one of the concepts was that, individuals with skills and talents are becoming more of a self-guided, self-directed entities, and they affiliate themselves with brands and organizations, and they reinforce each other's value creation. And not necessarily we should look at the world as ownership of assets, right? It becomes more asymmetric in terms of value a company can create and the physical assets it possesses and the human capital assets it owns. And we see this playing out really heavily, right? We see a whole emerging economy of creators. We see collaborators joining a new concept of DAO, decentralized autonomous organizations. For a period of time, holocracy and humanocracy and all of these ways of governing people were popular. So we're all experimenting, I think, with this new paradigm shift where individuals do not want to be owned by companies, right? One of it is driven by the sheer lack of loyalty from organizations, right? No longer career for a lifetime exists. You're somewhat of and maybe this is just a more of a Western statement, you're somewhat of a disposable widget in the overall value chain creation. And we've seen how this played out during pandemic, but even, with every bubble, with every turn of the economy, this is becoming more and more of a sore point and another reminder for individuals to say, look, you have to mind your own career, your own development, because you have to be in charge. As soon as you relax, you get the axe. So the opportunity, I think, for us is to start thinking about that shift in empowerment and what an emerging model might look like, whatever crassy the definition that you may want to come up with, because it's becoming more and more about being independent and being on the outside and more joining the organization for the time you're needed and you want to be there for the right type of exchange. And then the question becomes, what about those people who do not want to be in that type of relationship? What about for those people who cannot afford to be in that type of relationship or do not have the skills? Like, what are the protection systems that we need to have in place to be able to secure financial stability, to secure livelihood for individuals? And even those who do have the skills and luxury to be able in that type of relationship, right? Our broader set of systems, healthcare, access to insurance and other things are not set up for these individual independent workers either. So there's a lot of work policy-wise and kind of at the governmental level and regulatory level that needs to be done to accommodate these emerging tendencies. But I think that's where we're going probably as a society. I may be proven wrong tomorrow, who knows, or after the next election,
right.
But
Right.
at least that's
Right.
the world that I'm seeing. And maybe, again, I'm biased because I am part of it.
Yeah, no, I definitely try to check myself because obviously we are very close to all of this. And so I have to take a step back and certainly have conversations with people who are not paying close attention, whether that's, family or neighbors or what have you. But this is affecting everyone in some capacity. It really doesn't matter what role you're in, what seniority you have, what industry you're in, et cetera. Everyone's going to be on their own sort of journey, and AI is coming with some level of change, if not disruption, wherever you are. But what I ask each guest is, the name of this podcast is Elevate Your AIQ. And so when you think about that and you think about what people need to do to sort of prepare and, upskill themselves in, this impending transformation that's, technically already started, what do you think of? I mean, in terms of how people can, up their game and pay attention, not get overwhelmed, but still, pay attention to maintain control of their own career destiny.
This is one of the lowest barriers of entry technology. And it's, again, a lot of it about it is counterintuitive, right? We think, well, we cannot do that because somebody needs to teach us, or we cannot do it because maybe it's expensive. No, there are free versions that incrementally get better and better with every new paid version release. So just go create an account and play with ChatGPT 3.5. It's more than enough for you to grasp what it is. And then you don't need the lesson. You don't need to read a blog. You don't need to take a Coursera course or anything. You just ask it. And you would go down a lot of rabbit holes. You will learn the good and the bad, ask questions that you know the answers and ask questions that you do not know the answers. And you just have to use it as the same way as you used to start, a search on Google, right? Is the same way. I do not know if I need to go much to Google. The only reason when I go to do a search is when I think about the amount of electricity that is being wasted or used up every single time I run a query on some of these models. And by the way, I have a collection of them, and I'm paying for a bunch of them too, because I find value and worthwhile expenditure for a lot of the work that I do. It's worth $20 a month for the subscription, and figuring out the strength and the capabilities of different models for different purposes. But you don't have to spend that penny, and you don't have to spend anything. It's just your curiosity that it's important to have at play. And you wouldn't believe how quickly it will become your go-to place for any questions you have. Well, can you do this? And can you do this too? And then how might I integrate it? Because that's the approach you need to have with this technology. How might I be able to solve this problem, or to ask this question, or to do things differently that I traditionally do? You'd be so surprised the possibilities that it may open for you. And the other fun part is that a lot of people and innovation that is happening in this space. So you really need to talk to others and find your community of curious partners in crimes that you can bounce off ideas and learn from and get inspired. There's lots of it, that experimentation in the world of HR too. I think that a lot of technology solutions that are now integrating this in their tech stack too. So just try to subscribe to newsletters that shares, like, here's the latest greatest use case that I can possibly apply to. It's that early stage of possibilities and enablement and inspiration and ability to upskill yourself and ability to reimagine your portfolio of offerings to your customers. But you can't wait until you're ready, right? This is moving so fast. You really have to jump on a bandwagon ASAP.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. Stela, thank you so much. This was great. We could keep talking for a couple more hours, but I'm going to let you go. I really, really appreciate you joining me today. And I think there's a lot of great nuggets in this conversation that people can take away from. So thank you again.
Thank you for the opportunity to hopefully we framed at least one mind. If not, at least the two of us had a good banter and good catch up. So good spending time with you. Thank you.
Likewise. All right. Thank you, Stela. Thanks everyone for listening. Until next time.